I just got off the phone and my hands are still trembling. It was a conversation I never thought I'd have, but here I am, replaying it over and over in my head. My sister, my older sister, the one who helped me survive our darkest times, is furious with me, and I can't shake the feeling that maybe she's right. Or maybe not. That's why I'm here. Let me backtrack for a second. I'm 38 years old, married, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I have stability. That wasn't always the case. For years, my sister and I were each other's lifelines. We've been through hell together. Homelessness, scraping by, fighting for every scrap of hope. She's 41 now, and life has never been easy for her. But today, I did something that might have crossed a line. I asked her to reconsider trying to have a baby. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. She's been trying to conceive for almost 3 years now, relying on social aid and living off donations from her struggling online business. She's permanently disabled and has no partner or consistent financial support. And yet, she's determined to become a mother. I know how much this means to her, but I also know what it means for me, and for the life I've worked so hard to build. When I called her earlier, I thought I'd be careful. I wanted to be honest, but also kind. I wanted her to see my perspective. Instead, I laid it all out. How much she's relied on me financially over the years. How her plans for motherhood might affect not just her, but me and my husband too. I thought I was being rational, practical even. She thought I was being cruel. She accused me of looking down on her, of forgetting where I came from. Then she hung up. Now I'm left here with this question echoing in my mind. Was I wrong? Let's dive deeper into this story, because there's a lot to unpack. My sister and I weren't just siblings. We were survival partners. Growing up, we didn't have much, and by our early 20s, we had even less. At one point, we were homeless together, relying on shelters, goodwill, and each other to make it through. Those days shaped us, binding us in a way that few people could understand. When you've been that low, that desperate, you learn to trust the only person who's still standing beside you. Back then, we had this unspoken agreement. Whatever little we had, we shared. Whether it was splitting a meal or loaning a few dollars, it didn't matter. There were no IOUs, no expectations, just an understanding that when one of us was down, the other would step up. It wasn't charity, it was survival. When we finally clawed our way out of homelessness, we carried that bond forward. Money flowed between us freely when times were tough. She'd help me cover a utility bill one month, and I'd lend her enough for groceries the next. We both knew how hard life could be, so we didn't question it. It was our system, built on trust and shared struggle. But as we grew older, our paths started to diverge. I managed to find some stability, landing jobs that paid just enough to keep me afloat. She wasn't so lucky. Her health began to decline, and work became harder to find. Still, the pattern of giving and receiving stayed the same, until recently, when I realized just how one-sided it had become. Looking back, I wonder if those years of relying on each other are why it feels impossible to say no to her now. After everything we've been through, how do I tell her I can't be her safety net anymore? My sister's life today is a far cry from what either of us imagined when we were younger. She's 41, permanently disabled, and financially dependent on welfare and social aid programs. She's incredibly resourceful in her own way, managing to get by through a combination of government assistance, a struggling online business, and occasional GoFundMe campaigns on Facebook. But the truth is, she's barely making ends meet. Her dream of having a child has become her central focus over the past 3 years. She's been trying to conceive TTC with a determination that I both admire and question. She's not married or partnered, which isn't an issue in itself, but her approach has raised a lot of concerns for me. She's been soliciting sperm donations from random men online, often strangers who don't seem reliable or safe. It's a method that feels risky and, frankly, unstable. I know her intentions are pure. She's always wanted to be a mother. But the reality is, she's not in a position to support a child. WIC and social aid might provide a foundation, but we both know they won't cover the real cost of raising a baby. And her online business, which was supposed to be her financial lifeline, has never taken off. It's barely breaking even, let alone generating enough income to sustain a family. To make matters worse, I recently found out that our older brother had been secretly funding her for years before finally cutting her off. He said he couldn't afford it anymore, and I'm starting to understand why. The financial help she needs isn't a one-time thing, it's constant and growing. She's convinced that having a baby will bring her happiness, and maybe it will. But I can't ignore the mounting evidence that this choice might hurt her, and possibly her child in the long run. Still, how do you tell someone their dream might not be right for them? For years, I didn't think much about the money I gave my sister. It was just what we did, helping each other out in times of need. But things changed when I met my husband. He's from an upper-middle-class background, the kind of stability I'd never known before. Marrying him didn't just change my financial situation, it changed my perspective on money entirely. Before, I was just like my sister, scraping by, juggling bills, and living paycheck to paycheck. Then, suddenly, I had access to a life where those constant financial stresses weren't hanging over my head. My husband comes from a family where everyone has advanced degrees and high-paying careers. They have savings, investments, and financial plans. It was overwhelming at first, but over time I started to feel more secure. But with that security came a shift in how my sister and I interacted. What used to be a back-and-forth exchange of small amounts turned into something else. She started asking for money more frequently, and the amounts were larger. At first, I didn't notice how much it had changed. I was so used to helping her that it didn't register as a problem until my husband brought it up. One evening, he sat me down after a meeting with his financial advisor. He showed me the numbers, how much I'd been sending her over the past few years. It was staggering. Hundreds of dollars a month, thousands over the course of a year. And it wasn't just coming from me. She'd been texting him directly, asking for help. That was the wake-up call I needed. My husband and I agreed on a limit, $50 a month. It wasn't an easy decision, but we needed boundaries. Still, even with that limit in place, the requests kept coming. Every message was framed as an emergency. A bill overdue, groceries running out, something breaking in her apartment. Each time, I felt the same guilt I'd always felt. I knew what it was like to be in her shoes. Saying no felt impossible. But this dynamic wasn't sustainable, and it only became more apparent as my husband and I started planning for our own family. If I couldn't manage her expectations now, what would happen when she had a child to care for? The realization that I was financially supporting my sister far more than I had ever intended was sobering. My husband's pointed observation, "I didn't agree to finance your sister or her future children when I married you," stuck with me. It wasn't just his frustration. It was the reality check I needed. Our system of mutual support had morphed into something unbalanced, and I had let it happen. So, we made a decision. $50 a month. That was the maximum we'd give her moving forward. It was fair, manageable, and still offered her some help without jeopardizing our own plans. At least that's what I told myself. The first time I told her about the new limit, I braced myself for her reaction. To her credit, she didn't argue, at least not openly. But the subtle shift in her tone during our conversations made it clear she wasn't happy. And soon the emergencies started piling up. A text would come, "I'm out of groceries, $50 won't cover it." Another, "My phone bill is overdue, I'll lose service if I don't pay today." Each one chipped away at my resolve. I felt like I was constantly weighing my guilt against my boundaries, and guilt usually won. Saying no to her felt like saying no to the younger versions of us, the ones who had nothing and relied on each other for survival. But I couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on my marriage, or the resentment quietly brewing beneath the surface. My husband was patient, but his patience wasn't infinite. He wanted to start a family with me, not inherit the financial responsibilities of my sister's life. The boundaries were set, but they didn't feel solid. And every time I said no, I wondered if I was letting her down in a way I'd regret forever. When my husband and I decided to start trying for a baby, it was one of the most exciting and terrifying moments of my life. For years, I had been so focused on helping my sister that I hadn't stopped to think about what it would mean to grow my own family. The thought of becoming a mother filled me with hope, but it also brought a wave of new concerns. I started to see things differently, especially when it came to my sister. Her constant financial requests, which I had once brushed off as part of our dynamic, now felt heavier. The thought of bringing a child into the world while still being tied to her emergencies made me uneasy. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about emotional bandwidth. Could I really give my child the attention and stability they deserved if I was always putting out fires for my sister? My husband didn't hide his feelings either. He was supportive of my desire to help her, but he was also clear about his boundaries. "We need to think about our family now," he reminded me gently one night. And he was right. The life I wanted for my future child, a life free from constant financial stress, was only possible if I made some hard choices. But the thought of cutting her off entirely felt cruel. She was my sister. We had survived so much together. And as much as I wanted to focus on my own family, I couldn't shake the fear that I'd be abandoning her when she needed me most. These thoughts swirled in my mind for weeks, coming to a head when my sister mentioned, almost casually, that she was still trying to conceive. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't ignore the implications anymore. If she was struggling this much now, what would happen when she had a baby? Would I be able to say no then? Or would I be pulled even deeper into a cycle I couldn't escape? The decision to call my sister and address her plans to have a baby wasn't easy. I rehearsed the conversation in my head a dozen times, trying to find the right words, ones that would be honest, but not hurtful. But no matter how I phrased it, the core message was the same. I didn't think she should go through with it. And no matter how I said it, I knew it would hurt her. When I finally picked up the phone, my stomach was in knots. She answered, cheerful at first, and I almost lost my nerve. But I reminded myself why I was doing this, not out of judgment or cruelty, but because I genuinely believed this decision would affect both of our lives and not in a good way. I started carefully, acknowledging how much she wanted to be a mother and how I understood that dream. Then I laid out the practical concerns, the financial strain, the challenges of raising a child on social aid, and how it might all spill over into my own life. I tried to explain that I wasn't coming from a place of judgment, but from a place of shared experience. We both knew what it was like to grow up in poverty. We knew how hard it was, even with government programs and family support, to make ends meet. Her reaction was immediate and sharp. She accused me of looking down on her, of thinking I was better because I had married up. She said I had forgotten where I came from, and that I had no right to tell her she didn't deserve to have children just because she was poor. I tried to stay calm, to reiterate my point, but it was no use. She was furious, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. From her perspective, it must have sounded like I was telling her she wasn't good enough to be a mother. She ended the call abruptly, leaving me sitting there with my phone in my hand and my heart racing. I thought I'd feel relief after saying what needed to be said. Instead, I felt a deep, gnawing guilt. Had I crossed a line? Or was I simply doing what I thought was best? After the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the phone as if it might somehow offer answers to the questions spinning in my mind. The conversation hadn't gone the way I'd hoped, not that I really expected it to. But the intensity of her anger, the sharpness of her words, left a mark deeper than I'd anticipated. Her accusations replayed in my head on a loop. Did I really think I was better than her? Had my life changed so much that I couldn't see things from her perspective anymore? I didn't feel superior. I felt scared. Scared for her future, and for the child she so desperately wanted. But maybe she couldn't see that. Maybe all she heard was judgment. The worst part was the unresolved nature of it all. Nothing had been settled. She was still determined to try for a baby, and I was still just as worried about what that would mean for both of us. I knew she wouldn't stop asking for help, and I knew I wouldn't be able to keep saying no, especially once a child was in the picture. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something unforgivable. The bond we had built over decades of struggle felt fragile now, as if this one conversation might have undone years of trust and understanding. Was it selfish to set boundaries, or was it necessary? Was I protecting myself and my family, or was I abandoning my sister when she needed me most? The silence in the room felt oppressive, heavy with unanswered questions. I kept thinking about her words, her anger, her pain. She had hung up on me, but I knew this conversation wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a conflict I wasn't sure how to resolve. The days following our conversation were a blur of second-guessing and guilt. I replayed every word I had said, every point I had made, wondering if I could have approached it differently. Could I have been gentler? More supportive? Or was I simply wrong to bring it up at all? My sister's words kept ringing in my ears. Just because I'm poor doesn't mean I don't deserve to have children. She was right, wasn't she? Poverty shouldn't disqualify someone from parenthood. But this wasn't just about her financial situation. It was about the constant reliance on me and the strain it had already placed on my life. Still, the line between genuine concern and overstepping felt impossibly blurry. The doubts didn't stop there. I started questioning my own motivations. Was I really worried about her and the child she wanted to bring into the world? Or was I just trying to protect myself? My husband's words lingered too. We need to think about our family now. Was that selfish, or was it simply practical? I didn't have any answers, just an overwhelming sense of unease. The guilt gnawed at me, but so did the fear that, if I stayed silent, I'd end up in an even worse position, pulled into a cycle of financial and emotional stress that would hurt not just me, but the family I was trying to build. I kept going back to the same question. Was I wrong? Was I the villain in this story? Or was I just someone trying to navigate an impossible situation? The truth felt murky, and I didn't know how to untangle it. Maybe that's why I'm telling this story now, because I need someone else to help me make sense of it. So now I'm here, putting this all out into the open, because I don't know what else to do. I've told you everything. The struggles my sister and I faced together, the financial imbalance that grew between us, and the tension that exploded when I finally spoke up about her plans to have a child. And now, I'm left with this gnawing question. Was I wrong? On one hand, I feel like I had to say something. I've seen how hard life has been for her, even without a child. Adding a baby into the mix, when she's already struggling to keep her head above water, feels like a disaster waiting to happen. Not just for her, but for me too. I've tried to set boundaries, but they've never felt strong enough. A baby would only make those boundaries harder to enforce, and I don't want to become someone who resents her for needing me. But on the other hand, who am I to tell her how to live her life? She has every right to want to be a mother, just like I do. Her financial struggles don't make her any less deserving of happiness or family. Maybe I was too harsh, too quick to judge, too focused on my own fears to really listen to her dreams. I don't know. I've been turning this over in my head, trying to find the right answer, but the more I think about it, the more confused I feel. That's why I need your perspective. Was I out of line? Was I being selfish, or was I just being honest? I know this is a complicated situation, and I don't expect an easy answer. But hearing your thoughts might help me understand if I handled this the right way. Or if I owe my sister an apology. What do you think? Am I the asshole?